We have a few minutes before we begin. Those of you that are tuning in, welcome to the lab. This is a yoga laboratory focused on sort of diving into specific aspects of yoga practice, asana technique, meditation, breath work, maybe even philosophy at some point. So today's lesson is going to be focused on twists, an asana technique session. I'm Angelique, for those of you that don't know. You probably do since you're watching this on my Facebook page. I want to talk about twists. Twists are incredibly complex in the body as far as how the body moves and the kinesiology of it. So I want to start with a little bit of that, the anatomy and kinesiology of twists. What's happening in the body? Twists, first of all, where in the body do twists happen? The vertebral column is made up of, a bunch of bones stacked up on top of each other. There's 5 lumbar, 12 thoracic, and 8 cervical bones. Cervical neck, thoracic mid-back, lumbar low back, right? And these bones, as they're stacked, slightly change shape depending on where they are in the body. And it's the shape of these bones that determine the movement that's possible there. Here, I'm going to sort of try to show you a picture of some of these bones. Do you see? So, cervical bones are very sort of flat. There's not a lot of bony protrusions, and the bony protrusions that are there are quite small. This allows for a lot of range of motion, a lot of possible direction of motion, because the bones don't bump into each other so easily. Here in the thoracic, you see these bony bits sticking out to the side. You can't tell very much, but there's these bony bits in the middle that are quite long and they hook over each other. And then in the lumbar, we only get a little bit of view of the lumbar. The bones on the sides are smaller. The bones in the middle are less hooked, and there's bones that start to overlap each other. This is the best picture that I could find in my stash of books right now. But so there's usually like 3 bones. If you imagine my hand as the vertebrae, and then these 3 bones, those are sticking out away from the body, right? And depending on how they layer on top of each other, this determines what movement is possible. So in the thoracic, they're a lot flatter. The bones don't overlap as much. So there's a lot of rotation. This is twisting motion. There's a lot of flexion or towards the front of the body. There's a lot of extension towards the back body, and even lateral flexion, side, right? As you move into the thoracic, the mid-back, these bones over here, the middle ones, start to really hook and overlap each other. Now this prevents a lot of flexion and extension. Flexion and extension are also inhibited by the rib cage. The rib cage attaches to this bone in the front, each of those ribs, and attaches along the back body. So the ribs also inhibit a lot of forward flexion and back extension. But there is rotation available in the thoracic part of the vertebrae. Different in the lumbar. In the lumbar, these middle bones are smaller and they overlap a lot less. But the side bones, my fingers, the side bones sort of nest into each other. So this prevents a lot of rotation, right? Because these side bones start to bump. But because these middle bones are farther away, it allows for much more extension and flexion. As well as lateral flexion side, because of those side bones that we saw sticking out, right? These they're not as large in the lower part of the back, so they allow more of the lateral flexion. Okay. Bear with me with the anatomy. So this means that most of twist happens in the mid upper back, certainly the neck, right? Now the bones don't just suddenly change shape. You don't get to T12 and suddenly the bones are a new shape. There is a gradual shifting of one shape to another. So as you move into the lumbar spine, there's less and less mobility available in a twist direction. The next, if we try to twist beyond the capability of those vertebral shapes, the next joint tends to try to overdo it. So the next joints down beyond the space in the lumbar that cannot move is now getting into the sacroiliac. This is the triangle of the pelvis, right? Each of the iliacus on each side of the pelvis and the sacrum between. So if we can no longer twist in the lumbar, but we're trying to overdo our sort of twist intention, this can be affected, or the hip joints, where the leg bones attached to the pelvis can become affected. So in dealing with twists in asana, we want to be aware of what is stable and still, and where the movement is actually happening, right? So stabilizing the pelvis, usually, right? The legs, the pelvis, the hips, and only working the rotation in that upper part of the back. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a view of my back so you can see some of how this movement happens. Okay. So cervical, thoracic to about the base of my top, and then lumbar down here, sacrum here. So twisting, right, just rotating on this axis. Do you see where it happens in my back? Right? I'm keeping length and just rotating the vertebrae around each other. Now I'm trying to stabilize my pelvis so that the twist happens where it's supposed to. Watch what happens if I destabilize my pelvis, right? That hip lifts. I bring all of this with me, I can get really far around the room if I let my pelvis go. Yeah? So this is about the max of it happening in my thoracic, then my cervical can take it further. If I destabilize, I can get a lot further around the room. So it's deceptive. We can have this intention of twisting in relation to our external space and lose awareness of what's happening within our own bodies. Now, because there's so much movement possible along the vertebral column, we talked about flexion, extension, and lateral flexion. These pieces can also be a part of what is happening during a twist, depending on the posture, right? So, you can just turn on this one axis, this rotational axis, right? But you can add spinal flexion within the twist. So I am twisting and flexing at the same time. You can be twisted and extended at the same time. You can be twisted and laterally flexed, one way or the other way. Do you see? So twisted, lateral flexion the other way, while twisting, right? I'm still facing in this direction with my chest. Flexion, extension. So there's first this, I think, benefit of understanding these different movements in the body so that you can make a choice in your postures as to which combinations of movements you're actually needing in that moment. Different poses sort of require different things, and I'll demonstrate a few of those. Before we get into that, I want to talk a little bit about the muscular effort in a twist. Twists mostly happen with abdominal muscular contractions, right? Muscles on one side of the abdomen contracting to pull that rib cage towards that side, right? Back body muscles also supporting and working in the twist. That's the secondary work. So that when I'm twisting, my back body muscles are working on that side to draw my shoulder blade rib cage back and towards that back hip. So in the front, it's crossing this way. In the back, it's crossing that way. Yeah? It's sort of, think of it as quadrants. There's lower right, left, upper right, left, front, and back. So I guess that's more than 4. What's 8 sections? Double quadrants? I don't know, octodrants? But think of it as like being divided into 8s. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1, 2, 3, 4 in the front and back. And that will give you like a little bit of a help to think of what's engaging, right? This quadrant, and then that quadrant back there. Okay, let's look at some specific twist postures and see exactly what's happening. Now, my practice is Ashtanga. Ashtanga has this brilliant way of organizing the sequence that leads you progressively into more complex experiences within something like the twists. So, what is the first twist of the Ashtanga practice? Twisted triangle. So this is what we're going to look at first. Okay. So I'm going to set up, which way do I want you to see? This way. Set up my feet. Now, remember that twists happen in the upper back. So in standing twist, we're going to focus on stabilizing the pelvis and legs. This is our foundational aspect. And then isolating where the rotation happens in the thoracic and cervical part of the vertebrae. So we stabilize, find our leg position, hinge at the hip. Now once we're here, this position of the pelvis and legs should not change, or at least change very minimally, right? We're not going to let ourselves shift forward. We're not going to let our pelvis swivel around the foundation, right? We're going to focus on what's happening within the body, not what's happening in relation to the room. So if we stabilize this, keep our pelvis equally distributed, the weight of the body between both feet, keep our sacrum sort of parallel to the floor, then our twist happens in the upper back and then in the neck. Now if I try to go further than is possible, I'm going to pull my hip with me. Now it gets me further around the room as far as my point of reference, but it does not necessarily deepen the twist in the body, right? So from here, I'm going to twist the upper body and the head, the neck, into my twist. Now there's possibility as well in this pose to use too much flexion as you twist, or too much extension as you twist. And we are trying to isolate that. So in twisted triangle, it's just rotating around that one axis. We are not adding flexion. We are not adding extension, lateral flexion either. This is just isolating the twist in that one movement, that one intention, right? Other side. Boo-boo-boo. Stabilize your foundation so that the movement happens where it's supposed to. Cervical spine turns with it. Not flexing, not extending, but just finding the rotation, right? The second twist in the Ashtanga system is Parsvakonasana, twisted side angle. Now we add a piece to the puzzle here. We add a little bit more complexity. I'm going to start with my knee down. So again, we are trying to stabilize the pelvis and the legs as we twist. Now, if I were to twist and reach my arm across, so twisting here, right? If I were to just twist, if I were to just twist in this position, right, I wouldn't, okay, sorry, I forgot to do not disturb. I hope a call doesn't come through. So from this position, there is flexion, first of all, at the hips, but also in the lumbar spine to take us in to the leg, right? Taking the hand to the floor, twisting. There may, for some of us, be a significant amount of lateral flexion as well. I think I'm going to show you this from the front. So, twisting here, if we shorten this side of the waist to come in, lift up and over, we are sort of losing the integrity of the spiral in the spine. And this is a very common pattern. We tend to shorten on the side that we're moving towards. But in this pose, we want the opposite. We want the lateral flexion to happen on the other side. So we're twisting and we want to shorten on the side that brings the arm across, right? So this side is shortening at the waist, and this side is lengthening at the waist. Now, depending on your body proportions, your leg, your femur bone length to your torso, how those compare to each other, you may need more or less of that inside lateral flexion while you find your twist. Without that lateral flexion, it may be very difficult to keep the arm over the knee. It's that lateral flexion of that underside of the body that brings the shoulder back and really gets a strong leverage and connection across the leg, right? Then the sort of challenge of this pose when working the back leg is letting the thigh roll in the hip without it pulling the rest of the body. But that is more related to hip opening than to twisting functionality, right? Moving on, seated twists, right? Janu Shirshasana is the first of the Ashtanga sequence. Well, it's not the very first, but it's the most obvious first, where we experience twist. By opening our leg, we let our pelvis shift to a diagonal position. So this diagonal position sets us up facing in the space between our legs. So we have to twist the upper body to square off over that extended leg, right? So this is, again, one axis of twist on the body. And then it comes forward, flexing in the hip and maybe some flexion in the low back. We want to avoid lateral flexion here. What is very common is to get from here to there, we let this side of the body shorten again and reach across and try to pull ourselves in that way. First of all, that's lost, that doesn't really give us any twist as my chest is still facing the direction of my pelvis. It only shortens that side of the body, right? So keep both sides of the waist long, twist, and then find your flexion in your hips and in your lumbar, right? Does that make sense? Then Marichyasana A, so that's for all of the Janu Shirsasanas, depending on how open you take this pelvis as you take the leg position. In Marichyasana A, we're tilting our pelvis by lifting that sit bone, right? So if the sit bone is down, our pelvis is very lateral. And then it lifts to a diagonal as that sit bone lifts. Now, if my upper body were to follow the direction of my pelvis, again, I would be facing sort of the space between my legs. So in order to direct my belly button, sternum, chin along the extended leg, I have to find a little twist, right? So that I can be directed straight forward over the leg because the pelvis position was altered, right? Coming into Marichyasana C, the pelvis stays down, right? So we can find that first axis of rotation, just turning around the center column of the body. Now again, just like Parsvakonasana, the length of the femur bone and the length of the torso is going to determine how much lateral flexion or even like spinal flexion you need in order to leverage the arm across the knee. If I just stay tall, I don't get a whole lot of hook with that arm. So there's some lateral flexion and some front flexion in that low belly on that side that comes in to bring you down and in. And then this side is lengthened up and away. Again, it's very common that we take ourselves in by coming up and over, right? By flexing the outside of the waist and lengthening that inside. And now we have our weight tipped back, and it's much more restricted in the upper body and in the twist. Instead, find the singular direction of movement first, then come in by shortening on that inside side, keeping the outside open. And this is the same for D. More challenging for D because now we hike and lift this sit bone, which automatically starts to shorten that side of the body. So we want to do the work to give space to that as we twist. And then again, direct the rib cage down and in along the leg and free up and out here. This gives much more space for the breath while you're twisting, right? And much more sort of balance focus back onto your foundation as opposed to this. This is a lot more restricted for the breath and much more difficult, I think, to find balance. This is a lot of information I've been tossing at you today, but explore it within your practice and within your twist postures. If there are any twists that you do in your practice that I didn't address here, ask yourself, what is the foundation? What is the stability that doesn't move? What's the anchor that I'm moving this twist away from, right? If you have a solid anchor, you can create space within the twist motion. And if you pull that anchor with you, you are going to be compromising other parts of your body to make that happen. So what is stable, what is still, and what moves, right? And then ask if there's any other actions that go along with the twist, whether flexion, extension, or lateral flexion each way. Just a little bit of the benefits of twisting. Twisting has the effect of neutralizing the energy through the vertebrae. So if you did a bunch of back bends, like in Ashtanga Intermediate Series, after the back bend sequence, after Kapotasana and everything, there's a couple of twist poses to neutralize before going into the deep forward folds of leg behind head postures. So twists have a way of neutralizing the energy along the vertebrae and spine when you're switching sort of ideas, switching intentions, especially when you're switching from one extreme like that, like Kapotasana, to another, like behind head. Twists also benefit the internal organs. This twisting has a ringing effect on the internal organs, which keeps them soft. Our internal organs have a way of hardening as we get older. So twisting keeps them soft and pliable, stimulates blood flow through the organs, stimulates flow of the movement through the lymphatic system as well, which detoxifies the body, right? So they're very cleansing. They're about elimination, especially when you start to have an effect in those upper digestive organs, right? It can help stimulate movement through the digestive system as well. It helps to challenge the strength of the diaphragm, right? When we're twisting right here in the ribs, which can make contraction of the diaphragm harder. But the more that you focus on deepening and controlling the length and steadiness of the breath, the fullness of the breath, you strengthen that muscle of respiration, even the muscles of the intercostals. Twisting also helps a bit to, twisting and breathing deeply in that moment helps to give some release and stretch to intercostal muscles as well. And strengthen them depending on which sort of, what quadrant is being used. Okay, so I know I rushed through it. I wanted to give as much to you as I could before my son has to steal the room for his school lessons. If there's any questions or you need clarity on any of these things, we can do a follow-up video and I can answer questions. Please share them in the comments or send them in direct message. This video will be posted on my page, so if you want to go back and review something that you heard me say, it will be available to you. All right, thank you so much for joining me in the lab this morning. I'm Angelique. I will see you Wednesday, where I am going to either do shoulders or back bending, another asana technique day. If you have a preference, leave a comment. What do you want to see from me, shoulders or back bends? And we will get into it Wednesday at 8:30 Eastern Time. And Friday mornings at 7:30 Eastern Time are our primary series, Ashtanga primary series practice group. So you can join me for that every Friday morning. I'm thinking too of adding in some meditation practices in the early evenings, maybe Tuesdays and Thursdays. So keep your eye open for that. And these classes are, of course, donation based. During this difficult time, I completely understand if finances are tight. They are for all of us. But if you are able to and you wish to donate to keep this information coming, you can donate to me on Venmo at Angelique Sandus 0646 or at Zelle Angelique_yoga@yahoo.com. Have a wonderful day. Namaste, and I will see you Wednesday morning. Oh, it's early on Fridays, but it's posted anyway, so you can catch a replay. So if you're not up, are you still on the West Coast? If you're not up at 4:30 in the morning, you can catch it. You can catch it later because it'll be on my Facebook page. Just play it whenever you like. All right, bye guys.